Hey, I'm just dropping in to give a little bit of intro to this video. Today I'll be sitting down for a one-on-one interview with a friend of mine called Kory, who got in touch with the podcast after telling me his abduction story. It's a really interesting episode and I think that you will all enjoy it, so please listen to the end and hopefully you enjoy it. Thanks.
Bye.
3, 2, 1, and we're live. So we've got Kory here, who's willing to tell us a story that happened to him, an encounter and an abduction. He was graceful enough to reach out to us on Reddit when we asked if anyone had any stories they'd like to share. And we're quite a small podcast, so we really do appreciate him coming on here and sharing his story. So if you'd like to tell us maybe a little bit about yourself, Kory, and then we'll get into your story.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for having me. Pretty cool opportunity to be here, but it's also like a pretty cool, at least I look on it as a pretty interesting story, right? I sort of take the mindset of other abductees where it's like almost a privilege, or you've been selected for something unusual.
That's what I'd like to say. Like, I kind of do get jealous of people who have had experiences because I've not had one, and I'm a believer. I'm like a 90% believer.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword though, honestly, because then like once this happens to you, you really start to question a lot of things.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Like you're opening up Pandora's box, really. It can be uncomfortable, but there's a lot of thoughts I have on it, which we'll get into in a bit. But I guess a little bit about me. I'm 32 years old. I live in Maryland, Virginia, or I'm sorry, I live in Maryland in the United States. The story I'm about to tell took place in Virginia. I guess a little bit more about me. I am a professional security engineer. I do like security contracting work for a living, and I love hacking. I love video games, movies, music.
Same.
Hanging out with friends, just having a good time.
Yeah.
Living a normal life, I'd like to think. Yeah, so I guess we'll dive right in, and I'll set the scene, and we can get to it. But there is like a little bit of an explanation. So I mentioned it to Derek. I only recently relearned or fully understood the scope of this story, like in January of this year, 2021, because like I didn't always remember all of it. As weird as that sounds, I only actually remembered the last half of it.
Right.
Like post abduction, and I never really fully understood all of it until recently. Just for whatever reason, I vividly remembered the series of events leading up to it.
Okay.
So when I tell this story, there's going to be like I'm going to stop at one point and kind of explain. This is where I did remember originally, like the day it happened. I remembered this, and I didn't remember that. So
I'll probably cut in with some questions as well.
And please chime in, because honestly, having an inquisitive mind, or having another person, because see, like this, I can't really tell this story to a lot of people, right? Like this isn't something that like I bring up at a party or something like that. I've only told this story to a couple of people, and just because I only recently put all the pieces together and actually understood what happened. So I guess I'll get started. So to set the stage, I was 17 years old at this time. I was homeschooled, so I graduated kind of early. So I was attending my community college, which is like, I guess I don't know what kind of education system you guys have out there, if you have anything like that.
That'd kind of be a normal time to graduate for us. We kind of 17 years old is when we kind of leave school, unless you get some people that stay on.
Gotcha. So I was homeschooled, which was like kind of unusual for the time, but where I was living, it was actually pretty common because the schools were pretty bad. Like the buildings were literally falling apart. Like the school I left, they ended up condemning it because they have a problem with lead paint falling off the walls into the kids' foods. So it was pretty sketch. But it wasn't like bad per se. It was just like it was really run down. To give you an idea of where this took place, this was located on what's known as the eastern shore of Virginia. which
Okay.
it's like mainland Virginia is, you know, that kind of like iconic triangle shape, but there's actually a peninsula that's connected to the eastern shore of Maryland that's 2 counties. And so it's super, super small in terms of population. It's just like farmers and fishermen that live out there. So
Similar to where I'm
kind of,
from. It's kind of rural and
yeah, you'll see some similarities here in this location. It's just middle of nowhere.
yeah.
Um, there's not a lot of industry there unless you're like a farmer or a fisherman. So there is a NASA launch site over at Wallops there. That was actually a pretty big place to work, and that's where my dad worked, and that's why we lived on the shore. So I'm going to the community college. There's just one. It's called the Eastern Shore Community College, and it was just one building back then.
Mm-hmm.
And where I lived was just outside of one of the nicer towns called Onancock, which is Native American for fog. Which, if you would 100% believe it if you lived there, because the public schools would get canceled like a couple times a month due to fog. Was something I'd never seen until I moved there, but it's actually a thing.
Right, right.
It's super foggy there sometimes, but I
A
guess
mixture of like kind of because you're next to the water and the
yes, yeah.
climate
So I
and
lived. So there's Bayside and there's Seaside, to the Eastern Shore,
right.
and I lived on the Bayside. We lived specifically on Anancock Creek,
Mm-hmm.
which um, you could pull this up on Google Maps if you wanted to follow along. But basically, it's a pretty big creek that leads out right into the bay,
Right.
and I lived on the peninsula of that, almost like the last house before you got to the bay. Like you could look at our backyard, and it was boom, there's the bay. And so one night, I don't know the exact date. I do recall the timeline though, like when this happened. So I was taking summer courses,
Mm-hmm.
and I was pretty active into my studies. So I was there. The summer courses were like more condensed to get through, the same amount of a semester that in a shorter span of time.
Yeah.
So I'm taking courses, and I'm taking courses late into the night because they're just longer and there's more subject matter. And I'm doing my normal routine where, I'm saying goodnight to everybody because it by this time the campus is closed. The campus, the building
Yeah.
is closing, right? So we get out of class, and the security, the one security guard walks us out and then locks the door behind us. So this is right around 10:20, 10:30. I don't live super far, maybe 20, 25 minutes from the community college, which is like a breeze. Everything is super far away when you live in this type of area. To give you an idea, if you
Yeah.
wanted to watch a new movie, you'd have to drive an hour and a half north to get
Yeah.
into Salisbury to watch a
We're
new movie.
we're kind of similar where we are. I understand it. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
So you,
It's
you kind of get it. If you want to go anywhere, do anything, you need to have a car and get ready to drive. So 20, 25 minutes is like nothing, man. That's like, there's one highway that cuts through it, and there's two main roads. Like I said, Seaside and Bayside, those roads just go parallel to it. And like then there's a bunch of town roads, and that's pretty much it. So to give you an idea, I'm coming back from Melfa, which is where the community college is, and I know the back roads to like get to everywhere. I've been living on the shore long enough that I knew
yeah.
all the ins and outs. I'm driving back, and I'm almost home at this point when the incident, if you want to call it that, starts to happen. So I'm coming off of what's called Cashville Road onto Bailey Beach Drive, or actually, wait, no, it's Bailey Neck. Bailey Neck is the connector that comes off of Cashville that goes out to the community where I live in. And to give you an idea, at the time there was maybe 20 houses, probably not even.
So very, very, very low population.
Yeah, low population, high lot like area per capita.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
lots were huge, and I actually hated it because my parents used to make me mow our yard, and it was 3 acres,
Jesus
and we
Christ.
used a push mower, so it was like the worst.
I bet you're in shape though.
I was, um, working a computer job, 9 to 5, kind of takes its toll on you. But anyhow, so I'm going down Bailey Neck, and this road, if you've ever driven on a country road and you're at late at night, it
Mm-hmm.
can feel a little creepy just because it's
Yeah,
like,
I hate country roads at night. Hate them.
yeah, there's
Yeah.
just no light pollution, right? It's super dark.
Yeah.
Um, this area, there's to kind of give a better idea of the area. It's pretty flat on the eastern shore.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a lot of terrain change. It's just slightly above sea level. Lots of empty farmlands, and there are lots of pine trees, which they can get to grow massive out there,
Right,
like
right.
just towering. And so when you're driving through a road that's just cutting through pine trees, it just like it blocks out the sky
Yeah,
because
yeah.
they're so huge. So eventually if you're following along and like you actually look on this road on Google Maps, you'll see there are openings in it. So when I get to one particular opening, and this is just like I don't actually feel like anything weird is going to happen. I'm literally just driving home. It's probably close to 11 o'clock at this point.
Yeah, just a normal kind of day for you.
Yeah, just excited to get home and like, maybe watch like Adult Swim or something like that on TV
Yes.
before I go to bed. So I'm on my way home, and I'm at this point I just passed one opening. Yeah, I just passed Hicks Lane. That's right. So there's
Right.
this opening. It looks different now because it's been like partially deforested. So there's a lot more open fields now
Yeah,
than there
yeah.
were at the time. But anyway, so I get to the first clearing where it's open if you're like driving down this road and you're following along. And we're driving parallel to Nancock Creek, which is on our right.
Uh-huh.
So the lots are gapped so that they are if you're on this road and you look to the right, you'll see through the clearing and you'll actually see the creek behind the lots as you're driving along. And these are massive lots. These are probably like maybe, 6 to 10 acre lots. These are huge.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and some people use them to farm, some people just like having massive yards, I guess. But so I get to this clearing and I always slow down here because this is just like anybody that grew up on the shore. They don't ask if you've ever hit a deer before. They ask how many have you hit,
Yeah.
because they are everywhere. I've hit, I think, 3 deer. My dad has hit like 5 or 6, and I like to think I'm a pretty observant driver, but sometimes at night,
Yeah, it can't
like
be
they'll just jump out,
Yeah,
in front of you.
the light does something weird to them where they want to jump out in front of it. It's crazy.
Yeah. So there are a couple hot spots on this road where deer like to hang out at night.
Mm-hmm.
And you just get driving on the same roads every day, you kind of get used to the things. So there's one particular turn, I always slow down and I always look out
Yeah, 'cause you're
and
expecting it.
out into the field, because you'll see them out there and you'll see their eyes look back at you.
Yeah.
Because like I said, you can see everything in this clearing.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't see any deer, so I was like, okay, sweet. So I go back to looking straight, and at this point, what I do is I just kind of I scope the left side of the road where this side is not cleared. There are that's where there's just like gobs and gobs of pine trees, and at this point, my only real concern is I'm looking for deer that could bolt out in front of me that are right by the road.
Yeah.
So at this point, I'm starting to accelerate from having slowed down. And I guess to give you an idea, I'm driving a 93 Jeep Wrangler without a top. These things are it's my brother's car, and it's like a super fun car to drive when it's like nice out. We would take the doors off,
Yeah.
and I'm in my shorts and a t-shirt, and it's like probably like 70 degrees out or something, and it's nice. It's a
Yeah.
clear night, that I can the moon's bright, and because I could see super well into the clearing,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a quiet night. I don't recall anything about it being unusual or weird. And at this point, I start to notice it was almost like someone flipped on a light switch
Yeah.
where I'm paying attention to, like, I'm obviously driving, my car is a manual, so you need to take that into consideration. And I notice there is a almost a blindingly bright light,
Mm-hmm.
almost like we had one of these flashlights we would use to walk my dog late at night that it's like a million lumens
Yeah.
and it's stupid bright, looks like the sun
Yeah, yeah. I
blaring
know.
down at you.
Yeah.
This was like even brighter than that, and it was coming from an angle that, like, I looked in my rearview mirror immediately thinking, headlights or somebody was barreling down behind me, and there was nobody there. And I'm
How
just like, what the heck?
I was gonna say, like, how did you feel in that moment? Like, was it fear or
I
confusion?
actually I didn't feel any kind of fear. I just felt like I was trying to figure out what was going on.
Just
Like,
yeah,
where's
just
this light coming from? Um, and of course, the last place I would think to look is up.
uh-huh.
So I'm like actually looking around in the car, and I'm looking around, and I'm like, what is going on? And it looks, to give you an idea, it looks like it's day in my car. The light's not necessarily colored. It almost looks like it's sunlight.
Right, right.
And it wasn't like pure white. It wasn't like blue, red, or anything like that. It just looked like sunlight, which was unusual, right? So I'm looking around, and I don't understand what's going on. And because I'm looking over in my seat, because normally headlights, they'll just cast shadows.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
There was no
and,
kind of
and I
shadow or anything, it was just
no, I look over to the seat on my right, and it's completely illuminated. Like,
right.
I can see in the place where you tuck your feet under,
Yeah.
like, the dashboard. That's all illuminated, and I notice that, like, I can see it clear as day still to this day,
That
where
that
my arms on the wheel are illuminated. I
I
look
was
down in my shorts. I can see, my legs
yeah,
are
I was
lit
gonna
up.
say
I can see my
that
feet on
part
the
of the car
pedals.
that part of the car is never illuminated.
Yeah, and I'm like, this is so at this point I'm and this is all probably like a super slow motion breakdown of my thought process and where
Yeah.
I'm looking and what's happening. So now I start looking outside again, out to where I checked the clearing for the deer, and I look out there, and it looks like it's 11 o'clock at night.
Right.
It looks completely dark. It's still like a pretty bright night out for, it probably wasn't a full moon, but it was probably getting close to it.
Yeah.
And and then I look back in my car, back outside, back in my car, and I'm like, I don't understand, what the hell is this light?
Wow.
And right around that time, I notice I'm starting to get really drowsy. Almost like in the course of a second, I feel like my head is getting heavy. My hands are still on the wheel. My eyelids are getting heavy, and my head just kind of dips down. And the last thing I remember is just seeing, my feet on the pedals and everything being lit up. And I'm just like, this is weird.
And
And then
were you still
I,
driving at that point? Were you still moving?
yeah, I'm slowing down at
Right.
this point, and I'm just slowly starting to lose consciousness. And this is, well, I say slowly, but I remember like trying to fight it, being like, what am I doing? Like, I'm gonna crash, but
Yeah.
I'm just like, oh man, my head is, and then just like a light, I just went out. The next thing I remember is I'm parked on the side of a road, and it's actually a different road. And this is, if you follow Bailey Neck Drive, this actually goes out to a different group of houses. You actually have to turn off of it onto a gravel road called Bailey Beach Drive, and that's actually where I lived.
Yeah.
And I'm on the next road. I'm on Bailey Beach Drive at this point, and my car is to the side of the gravel road. And this is where it gets kind of hazy, because like it's sort of like when you're waking up,
Yeah.
but
That
I
kind of
was doing things while I was waking up. It felt like, um, if you fall asleep watching the TV or something, and
yeah.
then you wake up and you were doing something while you were waking up, like maybe you were getting out of your chair. but you're
Yeah.
still not 100% waking up. So you're still kind of just drowsy,
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the best way I can describe it,
Yeah.
is that
I get what you mean.
while waking up, I'm actually starting the car. The key was already in the ignition. And my seatbelt was already buckled. I just remember, putting my foot on the clutch and on the brake, and then doing the ignition, and then putting it into gear. Oh, it was actually it was already in gear.
Right.
Actually, I remember that now. Now that I'm going through these motions, it was already in. It wasn't in first, is what I remember. Yeah, yeah,
Right.
I remember having to put it into first and then starting it. Yeah, I remember that now. But like I said, it's super hazy. I'm not even like thinking. I'm not even thinking like, oh, I got to put it in gear. Because at this point, so this is like I was saying earlier.
Yeah.
I'm going to explain where my gaps in memory were. This point is where my memory actually starts
Right.
of this event. The For most of my life up until, like I said, this January this year, did I remember the whole sequence of having that super bright light
I was gonna say,
and
so
losing
that
my
was,
consciousness.
and how?
I remember the before then. I remember leaving school, leaving college,
Mm-hmm.
and I remembered this part. This is where my
Waking up.
memory actually starts.
And
Um,
what? I don't know if we're gonna be skipping ahead in the story here, but what was it that rejogged those memories? Was it?
I'll get to it
Right. That's no
because
problem.
that's actually kind of a story in and of itself.
Right. That's fine.
So I start the car, and at this point, like, I'm not even consciously thinking of doing these actions. I'm just doing them. I'm just like boop beep bop boop, almost like doing my usual thing. Even pulling onto the road, like, I still don't even think any of this is weird.
Yeah.
It's not until, like, to give you an idea of, if you're following along like on Google Maps, this is at the very beginning of
Mm-hmm.
Bailey Beach Drive. And to give you an idea, there's two 90-degree turns you have to take. You have to take one to the left and then one to the right,
Right.
to get to where I am. And this is about a mile, or about a half mile from
Okay.
where the lights were shown.
Right. Right.
And I lost consciousness. So I come to, start my car. I hop on the road, but the first thing I notice as unusual, for whatever reason, is the sun is now coming up. The clock on my car was always out of whack, so I never even bothered looking at it.
Yeah.
Um, I'm going through the usual motions of coming home late at night, where my mom was living with us, because my dad was in the process of getting a new job
Yeah.
in Maryland, and my grandparents lived with us too. So at this point in time, my mom is a super light sleeper, so I would always turn off my headlights, pull in really, really quietly, but normally in case she's asleep, because a lot of times she was still up at this hour, at like, I say this hour is in like, if I was getting home around 11,
Yeah. Yeah. So
just to make sure I got home safe.
one of the things I wanted to ask, you don't have to. You don't have to tell me if you don't feel comfortable, but I was going to ask about your family. Has your family ever had experiences or anything like that? Because one of the things
Yes,
that you find with a lot of cases like this is that it can be
it can be
almost,
hereditary.
yeah, almost hereditary. Like
Yeah,
the family also has experiences, or I don't
yeah.
know if,
I only recently, like very recently, talked to my parents about this. So they're kind of still stewing on it.
yeah,
Um, I asked my mom about UFOs before, just randomly, and this was actually before I recalled these memories.
yeah,
And she said she's seen one before when I
right,
was very, very young. She saw a UFO over top of one of her neighbors' homes when I was like not even one at this age.
right,
So this is probably in like 88 or early 89. And she said she saw the typical, this is late at night, she was having trouble sleeping, got up, walked around the house, looks out the window, boom, there it is above the neighbor's house. It's hard to say these like secondhand stories too, because it's like I didn't
yeah,
experience the things
obviously.
that they experienced, but
Yeah, I just
um
wanted to see if there was any other kind of, because sometimes abduction can kind of run in the family,
yes.
if that's the right way to say it. But
Yeah.
We can continue with your story if you like.
Yeah.
Once you
Yeah.
got
So
home and
yeah, so I got home. I pulled it in super quiet, and like I said, the first thing I noticed that was weird was the sun was coming up,
yeah,
and I was like, okay. And I walk in and everybody's asleep.
mm-hmm.
Because like I said, that was also unusual because my mom should have been up.
Yeah.
But I look at the first thing I do when I walk in is I look at the microwave and I see it's at like 4:13 or something like that in the morning, which meant like I have a little over a 5 hour gap in time.
Is that the point where the kind of realization set in?
Yeah. So
Yeah,
that's where in my mind at this time I don't even think about like aliens or abductions or anything like that because I'm just like, where the hell did the time go?
yeah,
I couldn't piece it together, and I was like, is that clock wrong? So I went upstairs and checked my clock, and I was like, no, it's now like 4:15 in the morning. I don't know what the hell is going on. I'm pacing around in my room trying to put together what happened
mm-hmm.
because from my point of view, like I think this is like some kind of medical issue or something happened. I passed
Yeah.
out and I lost time. There's an excellent book that I recommend everyone read if you're even remotely interested in the abduction phenomenon, and that's Dr. John Mack's book called Abductions.
I haven't
And
actually seen that. I might need to look that up myself.
yeah,
I've
so
been buying a lot of books lately for the podcast for
mhm,
research purposes, so that might need to be one I pick up.
I would put this at number one because this was actually a book that started to help me put the pieces together of understanding what actually happened because at the time I'm sitting there thinking, I'm just like a scared 17-year-old going like, what the hell? Was I drugged? What I'm trying to remember what I ate.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember everything and nothing's coming to mind. I can't put it together. So then I'm like, and the weird thing is I don't even feel like I'm tired at this point. Like
Yeah.
I've done all nighters before with my friends, and around 4 or 5 is where I'm like, you know what, man, I'm beat.
You
I'm
know,
good. I'm going to sleep now. And
um,
it's one thing if you're like playing video games all night and you're staying active, but you can still kind of tell, right? 5 a.m. rolls around, the sun starts coming up. You're like, you're starting to feel it, even at 17.
like the
Like,
first thing that runs through your head is, fucked up.
yeah, exactly, right? Like, crap.
Yeah.
I'm in trouble, or I did it again, or whatever.
Yeah.
That's certainly happened before. This is interesting because I don't feel any bit like that.
Yeah.
As weird as that sounds, like I feel like it's 11 o'clock. Or not even. I almost feel more energized now
Yeah.
than
I was gonna say, so do you feel like you're like kind of well rested or?
I would say. It felt like I had like a cup of coffee. Like I
Right.
was like motoring.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because my mind's racing. I don't think my adrenaline was up, which like could explain that, but it didn't feel like my adrenaline was kicking. It just felt like I was energized, like I could get up and go for a run or something if I wanted to.
So what did you do once you got home? Did you go to
I
bed
I
or?
just I tried to figure out what the heck happened and I couldn't.
Right.
So, but then I was like, I still feel energized. I was like, what do I do? Like, do I wake up my parents and talk to them about it? Do I, or just my mom? But I erred on the side of not doing that because she can get really grumpy if I wake her up,
Yeah.
especially at like 4 in the morning or something.
Mhm. I know
So
about
I,
that.
I just said I should try to go to sleep and I'll think on it some more tomorrow. And interesting enough, I was able to fall right asleep,
Yeah.
which, like
That
I said, is really difficult for me to do.
I was gonna say that's strange, especially if you're feeling kind of energized. Like,
Right.
yeah.
But I was like, it's 4 a.m. I either stay up at this point. I either stay up or I go to sleep and try to get what sleep I can. And I felt fine the next day. And I kind of just like I couldn't figure out what happened, so I sort of just mentally brushed under the rug because at this point in time, I've only had a an offshooting interest in UFOs. I was just like intrigued by the idea, not actively researching it, or it's just
Yeah.
kind of whatever. 2017, we jump forward and the New York Times article comes out that really kind of paints it out that like, hey, UFOs are real, government's been interested in them, what they are. they're real and they're really interesting, and I kind of got a lot more interested in them.
It's been
Um,
it's been quite a kind of chaotic couple of years when it comes to
oh
UFOs.
yeah,
Just the amount of things that have been coming out, and it's
it's staggering.
and it's so strange as well. It seems like when I was younger, I felt like if the government came out like they did, kind of, was it last year they came out with the Tic Tac footage and things like
Yeah,
that, and then quite recently as well, they admitted to having some wreckage of an
yeah.
unknown aircraft, and I don't know what it was like in the States, but in the UK, it felt like nobody cared, and it was so
Now, and
strange.
this is what a lot of folks have been saying why we need disclosure, right? Because these all point to disclosure. Because what's realistically going to happen when the government comes out and says, "Yep, here's what we know. Aliens have been here. They've landed. They've talked to us."
Yeah,
Like, and if they're hearing this on the radio, the guy driving to work is gonna be like, "All right, I hope this doesn't
yeah,
cause
yeah.
traffic on my way to the office."
I was actually watching. Do you watch Joe Rogan at all?
It's interesting you mentioned it because I was gonna say I usually just watch the ones when he has interesting people on.
Yeah,
Like,
I'm
you know,
quite.
he most recently had like Bob Bigelow.
Yes, yeah, I'm kind
He's
of
had
similar.
Commander Fravors been on there. That one's amazing.
See, he had I don't know how recently it was. He had I think the guy's Mike Baker, but don't quote me on that. And he's an ex CIA agent. And
Oh yeah, I saw that. I haven't watched that one recently.
well, basically, Joe said to him, "What's the deal with UFOs?" Because that's
Yeah,
Joe.
that's what Joe does.
Joe always wants to know what the deal is with UFOs, and Mike, I'm calling him Mike. I think that's his name. He kind of danced around the question and then mentioned some stuff about China not knowing what we've got, and it seemed like he was really, really dancing around the question. And even Joe kind of said that. It was like, that's a really good way to avoid a question. Maybe the worry has always been foreign governments as well, and
Yeah,
it's
well,
always a factor.
once you start dealing with intelligence, like
Yeah,
once you get intelligence involved, it starts getting really complicated because like there's so many moving parts to these agencies for one because they're so compartmentalized.
yeah,
So left hand's doing something that the right hand doesn't know about. And on
exactly.
top of that, like if you're ex CIA or CIA or whatever, like you have so many NDAs on you, you can't talk about this type of stuff, even if you
Yeah.
do know. You
That's
know,
the thing
like
as well. A lot of people said when Trump was in office, they were like, Trump would have said, Trump would have told us all, Trump would have told us everything. I think, yeah, he would have, but does Trump know? Probably not. The
probably
only
not. I don't even think they're
make,
like really all that in the know because they're just like presidents are just kind of more of a revolving door. Like
yeah,
it's the
exactly.
agencies
It's
that are.
not a permanent job. It's a 4-year job,
So
8 years at
why
most. Why would you tell them everything?
right? Yeah. So
And
it's interesting to talk about that stuff, but there's a little bit more that I wanted to go over.
we can go into that a little bit later if you want, and just continue with your story
Yeah.
right now. That'd be fine with me.
Yeah. So at this point in time, you know, like I said, 2017, I'm getting more interested in UFOs and UFOlogy or what have you. Yeah, I'm not really diving into abductions because I kind of like I'm more interested in tangibles in terms of like findings.
Yeah,
And people's like saying this happened to me is so different than having like a picture or footage of a UFO in my
yeah,
mind.
I used to
I
feel the exact same way. Um,
yeah.
I didn't give much credit to abduction stories, and
Yeah.
I feel like I missed out on a lot of great ones. Like,
Yep. I agree. Yeah, I mean, I can picture these things clearly now. Even though in this is actually kind of like the weird part, right? Where how did I remember what I ended up remembering? Why did I forget it in the first place? You
yeah,
know, what's the deal with that? It's not until I read this book and because you know, like I said, 2017, I took an interest in UFOs and I found that interesting and
yeah,
I started to deep dive into it and I kind of just put abductions on like the back burner. I was like, okay, I'll get around to, the Betty and Barney Hill
Yeah.
and the Travis Waltons and this, that, and the other, the big watermark ones later, because I'm more interested in the craft.
Uh-huh.
And that might just be because I used to just be an engineer, but that's just like why I got interested in it. I was like, how do these things work? This is amazing. Just
Yeah.
trying to theory what's UFOs, what's up with that? And then like kind of everybody, you kind of just have to keep your head above the water too, because this thing it's not an inch deep and a mile wide. It's like 20 miles deep and a mile wide.
Yeah.
And you could pick any topic you want, and you can go deep in it. So I get around eventually to abductions, and I'm doing research on it, and everybody's saying you have to read this book by the late Dr. John Mack, because I always look at credentials, right? Like, uh, you know, who are these people saying these things,
Yeah.
and what credentials do they have?
Yeah, credentials mean a
Because
lot.
yeah, because I don't want like somebody that's cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, and you kind of, because there's so much out there, you don't want to waste your time with that.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Um, it's so hard, and like it's so hard to make heads or tails of it. This story of mine is interesting because like I know it to be true and I know it happened. I'm not trying to convince anyone. It's sort of just like it's my story. I've had other weird things happen, but I guess to kind of get a full circle around to how I ended up remembering this, I started reading this book
Mm-hmm.
by Dr. John Mack. He's and he's got some credentials, right?
Yeah.
He's passed away now, but he was the head of the psychiatry department of Harvard. So this guy
Wow.
he has a doctorate. He understands the human psyche, and this whole book, he just started pushing the question of like, why isn't anyone really taking this abduction phenomenon that's happening in people's psyche? How come they aren't taking it seriously? If this is a condition, right? If these people are imagining these things, then this is a condition
Yeah.
that needs to be treated. And how do we treat it, right? That's how he kind of started his process,
Yeah.
and he outlines this all in his book. And it wasn't until like I get to the chapter of like the symptoms
Mm-hmm.
of the they call them experiencers, right? People that have been abducted.
Yeah.
The symptoms of the experiencers, and when I started reading it, my blood went cold. Like
Jesus.
I was like, what? Because like I could relate to almost each and every single one of these types of symptoms.
Yeah.
Like fear of darkness. And these are things that like I've always been like this. I've always been afraid of needles. I've always been afraid of the dark.
Yeah.
I've always had difficulty sleeping. Like the list goes on and on
Don't stop.
of
As I say, you're listing those three things, and I'm like, I'm scared of all those things.
oh dude, it was staggering because it's like a couple paragraphs, right? And he was
Right.
breaking all these things down, and I'm like, yes, 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 yes. And I'm like, what the hell? And
Yeah.
so I read the book later on, and it seems to be commonplace to not remember these incidents that actually happen, right?
Yeah.
And so when that happens, I start figuring out like, okay, well, what do people do to regain their memories? And I've been having anxiety issues at night, so I've been doing a lot of meditation.
Mm-hmm.
Meditation, like, is probably the most effective thing I've discovered that helps me relax.
Yeah.
Some people are saying that they can meditate and they can try to focus to try to understand certain things that happen, to try to regain some memories or some semblance of their memories.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I got into meditation that I went into like a session where I was like, okay, I'm going to try to remember what happened in that gap of time, right? Because that's another really common symptom is you're gone for a period of time.
Right.
And like I think about all my experiences on the shore, and that's just another one of those like slam dunk cases, right? If you're an alien and and let's just say you're hypothetically, you're an alien and you're gonna
Yeah.
pick up this guy, when would be the best time to do it? Well, he lives in the middle of nowhere. There's like everybody's asleep. It's late at night in this
Yeah.
clearing. He's in a car with no roof. Let's just yoink him real quick
Mm-hmm.
and then put him back down later.
It
Like
may
I could, I can, logically speaking, that seems like a pretty good time to do it versus like when they're in bed and you have all these logistics you have to work with.
Yeah, or it could even be like a opportunist thing, like they're
They
flying
were just
along and they
there.
just go, oh look, there's a little human on his own. Let's just snag him real quick.
Yeah, we need some more point star statistics or whatever.
Yeah,
I can see that because like if you look at it on a map, man, it really is kind of like middle of nowhere. There's just,
yeah,
and
perfect
it's
kind of.
by the bay too, so if like I don't know if that means anything or not, but it seems like these phenomena aren't really restricted to
Yeah,
one particular place, but it seems more likely, it seems safer for them to do it in like low populous zones. Yeah.
but if I just pause you for 1 second here. So we're gonna go into what you remembered after your meditation.
Hmm.
So what I'm gonna do right now is we're gonna take a little quick break, just so I can run to the bathroom and stuff. And we're back with Kory and his story. I didn't mean that to rhyme, but it
Well,
did.
it's all right. A lot of things
Um,
rhyme with Kory, surprisingly.
yeah, just took a little bathroom break there, just kind of sort ourselves out. We've been recording for nearly an hour, so
It changed so many things about the way I think and the way I research these abduction cases now.
yeah,
And it's changed everything for me, man. Because I mean, it's like, it's hard to put it into perspective that it's like you were abducted, like
yeah.
it
See,
changes everything.
we spoke earlier a little bit about the how sometimes wish that I could have an experience because I so strongly believe, but then there's part of me that's just like
Eh.
I haven't experienced it myself, so I have
Yeah.
that little kind of blind spot where I'm like, oh, I don't know. I'd love to just have the confirmation that,
Yeah.
but at the same time, are there any negative effects to that? Is there any? Does that have a
There
negative effect on you?
it does. There are some. And this just kind of goes back to like my anxiety at night. Like now I'm sitting here thinking like after I had this realization, right? Like I meditated and I the first thing I remembered that I couldn't was the light.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing my arms illuminated at night in
Okay.
in my Jeep, and I slowly started to put it together over the course of like one meditation session that over like 10-15 minutes,
Yeah.
and I slowly was putting it together, and then it just hit me, like a bag of cement, just like, oh my god, I've been I've been abducted. It makes, and I sense like I've talked to my family and about it, and my parents are very religious, but they were surprisingly open-minded about it
Yeah.
because I explained to them that like it just makes sense that that's what it was,
Mhm.
when versus like it's so unusual for there to be like a medical condition that I could continue operating my car while unconscious
Yeah.
through a winding road that has like a really nasty ditch, by the way. This isn't like a road that you can just like go woo and just yank the wheel on. This
Yeah.
is, you go in
Yeah.
a ditch and you need a tow.
Yeah. It's not somewhere you would have gotten to by accident.
Right. And over 5 hours, right? It's like,
Yeah.
what the heck? It makes the most sense in my mind that's what happened. I wish I could remember more.
That.
Like,
That's.
and this is where I'm sort of like unsettled a little bit, because like in my mind there were one of three things happened, right? Like that could explain the 5 hours.
Mhm.
Either it's a time dilation thing, right? So I was picked up, according to John Mack, and this is his book, and this guy, he's interviewed, like over 90 plus, he's done over 90 plus hypnosis sessions
Yeah.
with different experiencers,
Mhm.
and his book is kind of like a culmination of his findings, and they usually last like half an hour to 45 minutes.
Right.
They can last longer though, right? Like Travis Walton's case is pretty famous because he was gone for
Yeah.
5 days.
Days. Yeah.
Um, but his instance was very, very unique in terms
Yeah.
of like abductions go. They're usually just like, the way I see it is they're doing something science related, where they're like what we do with animals or
Yeah,
with like
yeah.
sharks, right? We pick them up out of the water, we tag them, and then we just send them back in.
Yeah. Well, that
They're probably
was
doing something
that's
like
something
that.
that I always bring up to people. There's a lot of kind of nihilistic kind of minded people out there who'll be like, why would aliens care about us? Why would they even bother? Why What I like to say to them is, why do we bother with uncontacted tribes? Why do we bother with animals?
Right.
You know, just because they're alien, and if they're coming here from a faraway place, it
Yeah.
means that they're so much more advanced than us technologically. That doesn't take away that curiosity that any kind of intelligent being's gonna have.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's hard to kind of quantify these things because we just have to make large assumptions.
yeah,
And you have to be careful with this stuff, right? Because you can make some crazy ones.
definitely.
And it's interesting. Like I said, it could be it's 5 hours, right? That I was over 5 hours I was gone. So that's
Mhm.
why I'm kind of nervous about it, because it's like that's a lot longer than most abduction
Yeah.
cases. Um,
Have you?
so like I started to think, well, why was it? Well, typically it's either one of three things, or it could even be a combination where it could be a time dilation
Yeah.
thing, where like let's just hypothetically speaking, let's just say aliens do exist. They have some sort of travel that lets them travel
Yeah.
from planet to planet, system to system, whatever, faster than light travel.
Mhm.
Um, well, if that's the case, then you don't necessarily have to be on planet Earth to do your study, to do whatever your
That's
sciencey
yeah.
thing is that you're doing.
That's
So
true.
for safety reasons, they could have just 86'd out of there and just like, got out of the atmosphere. In that case, time would be proceeding faster wherever that ship goes.
Yeah.
Hypothetically, if they just went out into the middle of nowhere in space,
Yeah.
time would time would be progressing on planet Earth faster than wherever they are. Therefore, if they did a 45, 30-minute little thing
Yeah.
and then they brought me back, maybe 4 or 5 hours had passed. Mhm.
A lot of people have theories these days on what what are being called ultra terrestrials now,
Yeah.
where they
Um,
aren't from a different planet, they're from a different dimension.
I can see that. It's interesting because I can see it making sense and I can see it also not making sense, because you have to realize the level of technology that we're dealing with here is so far
It's
advanced, bordering on magical, right? It just doesn't make sense to us that we could just blanket statement say like, extra dimensional. And
yeah,
that could certainly be true.
it's always a possibility.
It's always a possibility. And this is where, like I said, you have to keep a level head on your shoulders and keep your head above water, because like there's some outlandish theories that like you can't disprove, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
but it's hard to kind of understand.
There's
One of
the
like the recurring themes that happens with these abductions is they usually have like telepathic warnings that they're giving to the
yeah,
experiencers, where they're like, hey, you got to be careful with your planet, with your technology, with your environment.
yeah. There's always a very environmentally friendly message when it comes to these stories, which I
Right.
always part of me finds suspicious, but then the other part of me is like, if they are advanced, they would be warning us of that.
I go back and forth on actually having this, because I'm considering having regression hypnotic therapy
Yeah.
done, where that's this is what Dr. Mack specialized in, was putting people in a hypnotic trance
Yeah.
and then walking through the incident or the memories that they have.
Mhm.
Um,
That's
and
a very popular way when it comes to abductions. I can't think of
yeah,
a single abduction case where the person hasn't had hypnotic therapy at some point just to unlock some memories.
yeah, it's scary to me personally, because it's
Yeah.
like what happens if I relearn what happened in those 5 hours? Like,
and you
because
can't handle it.
the window of time is so long that, like, according to these other incidents that have happened, like I said, the first one is it's either time dilation. The second instance, it could be, there was an interview where, like, it's not reasonably uncommon for experiencers to have a dialogue with
Yeah,
the
yeah.
entities that are doing the abducting.
I've heard a lot of this
Yeah.
as well.
It seems weird, but I feel like these abductions are relatively straightforward like that. Like,
Yeah.
they have a very simple purpose for why they're doing it.
So,
Um,
you still don't have any memory of that actual 5 hour gap yet.
no, none. Because that's why I'm saying, like, I'm going back and forth on getting it done. Because I only relearned that this was an abduction experience, a few months
Mm-hmm.
ago. So I started to research, like, hypnotherapists, but the thing is a lot of them, like, I've seen videos where people are under hypnosis where they ask a question like, well, what color was the saucer?
Yeah.
Or, you know, did they have black eyes? And you have to make sure that they're not giving you leading questions. That's one of the reasons why I really liked Mack, because
Yeah.
he would do the opposite, where he would be like, well, maybe, you thought they didn't have hair, but maybe they were just balding.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they would say, no, no, they didn't have any hair, and they had an egg-shaped head, or whatever. And
Yeah.
and that's the type of hypnotist I
I
want.
think
Is
I'm
I want
familiar
one
with
that's not leading. I'm a little nervous about getting it done, because, like, what if, like, okay, I sit down and I regain these memories, and what if I have a picture perfect memory of
Mm-hmm.
sitting down across from an alien and we're talking about something?
Yeah.
That's
That would
just like,
that would
whew,
terrify me. Yeah.
scary, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's a little scary, because I didn't really think about it until, like, I started planning a camping trip, and I had a sudden realization that it's like, this would be the first time in, like, 2 years I've gone to a remote location.
Yeah.
If I were an inquiring kind of abductor, that's probably a good time that I would yoink somebody.
Yeah. That's
So I'm like, because that's the other thing too, is I've had other incidents that were pretty inexplicable, but it's like, it's just bordering on, like, it could be rationalized. Like, I brought this up with my family, and
yeah.
they recalled an incident where, with me, that they were like, you remember when you were home alone, um, and you called me and you said you passed out? And I was like, I didn't remember it at first, but I started to think more about it on my drive home, and
Yeah.
I was like, oh yeah, I do recall this one incident where I was just, and this is at the house on Eastern Shore, Virginia, on Bailey Beach Drive, middle of nowhere,
Yeah.
and I'm home alone. My grandparents moved in with my parents'
Mm-hmm.
new place up in Maryland. I was back home for, like, the weekend, I believe. I was going to college up in Salisbury, Maryland.
Yeah.
And so I was coming down and I would spend the weekend with my friends. This particular night, I was just home alone, relaxing, and I'm hanging out on the couch. And the next thing I know, it's almost like a light switch just got flipped, where I find myself waking up on the flat of my back, on the floor,
Wow.
like, in the center of the room. Like, I pretty much would have to have fallen asleep and, like, catapulted myself off the couch, over the table, and onto, like, the flat of my back in front of the TV. And I
Yeah.
remembered it, and I remember waking up, and like my parents said, I woke up, I didn't know what had happened.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I passed out, so I called my parents to let them know. And we had a bunch of, like, medical tests done on me, like, the next week, and everything was fine. They
Yeah.
couldn't figure out what it was.
One of the things I was going to ask was, after the incident, did you have any kind of physical examinations or anything like that?
Well, that time I did. Nothing unusual happened. I've had other incidents where I've had weird dreams and I wake up with scratches on
Right.
my body. Like I've had that happen a couple times where I sometimes can recall and sometimes I can't. But it feels like a dream sequence where
Yeah.
like I'm in a room that's dark with
Mm-hmm.
red lights, and I hear strange noises, and I wake up and it looks like I took my nails
Yeah.
all over my body, which is weird because I sleep in
Jesus.
clothes. Like I sleep on like PJ leggings
Yeah,
and
that
usually a
is.
t-shirt, and I'll have like scratches all up and down my chest and my back. To kind of go over a couple other really common symptoms,
Yeah.
um, a really common one is having frequent nosebleeds. And
Right.
when I was younger, because that's the other thing too about this phenomenon, if you will, it's usually not lightning doesn't strike twice. It's usually like it will. It's almost like when you get hit by lightning, you're more likely to be hit by lightning
Yeah, well,
for the rest of your life.
it seems like people who have abduction experiences are almost chosen, and
Yeah,
it often repeats.
yeah, and it makes sense from like a scientific point. If you're doing statistics
Yeah.
on a person or a populace, you would want to have more than one single data point. That's almost where like the phenomenon starts to get like a little creepy in my mind, because it's starting to make logical sense
Yeah.
that, and and that gives it like even more validity, where you're starting to say like, okay, I'm your, and like I was saying, this is where like you start to see bigger picture stuff where
Mm-hmm.
it's starting to make sense,
There's
what's
a
actually happening. What is it that they're doing? Why me?
Yeah.
Why do they do it? Like it's so frustrating that like they have the technology. Let's just say it. They have the technology to hack our brains,
Yeah. Yeah.
to turn us on and off like a light switch, to pluck us up out of our vehicle. And
It's
they had to done something to the car too, right? Because it moved.
yeah. Yeah.
um, so it's like they clearly have this technological capability to do all these things, and they choose to instead hack our brains or block our memories, or I don't know how to explain how they're doing it, why we can't remember
Yeah.
what happens on the saucer. It,
It's so
why do they do it that way instead of just like maybe coming down and being like, hey, would you like to come with us, this, that, and the other? I guess, and this goes back to like Travis Walton overpowering the aliens. Like
yeah.
it's clearly safest for them to
Yeah.
do it this way.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I have a couple different theories on
Mm-hmm.
what I think they are and what they want or what they're doing. The one that has like the most traction in my mind, and when I say they and them, I'm basically referring to what are kind of commonly called the grays,
Yeah, yeah.
which are like the most common, when people do have these abductions, that's usually the species, if you will, that they encounter
Yeah.
are stereotypical, right? But
Are
that's
they
just because there's been an awful lot of reports about them.
or are they androids?
Or are
That's
they androids, right? So that's
yeah.
sort of like my working hypothesis is that they are a form of artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
um but and there is like a rationale for it, right? A lot of these experiencers, they usually have reports of like some kind of a sexual encounter of
Yeah,
some
yeah.
kind,
Yeah.
in the sense that like they're either like harvesting or planting eggs in females or collecting sperm from males.
Yeah.
Seems to be very common.
Mm-hmm.
And it
I've seen a
sounds
lot
like
of
weird to
this.
talk about it, but like this is actually sort of kind of what's happening. Is this
Yeah.
is one part of it, right? The other are like they're doing medical experiments where maybe they're doing a tissue sample, or
Yeah.
they're doing a brain scan. I don't know. It's something medical in nature, but some of those instances are something to do with like reproduction, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah,
and what
I've
does that
seen this.
imply? So it's like obviously, so according, and this kind of goes back to, you'll see me go back to Dr. John Mack's book a bunch, where they talk about um, what people do remember talking to the Greys about, and one of the things is like that they're told what they're doing is there is a couple different things. They're told that they're making sure that their species is basically being backed up in
Yeah.
the event of a global catastrophe.
Mhm.
But if you stop and think about it, like, and Joe Rogan's talked about this before, where he said, like, hey, they're just like more evolved forms of us.
Yeah.
So if you were to develop a system to do long distance forms of travel, right, being an organic living being would actually be a disadvantage, right?
Yeah,
That's why we send.
I was about to say that if we were to figure it out tomorrow and it was going to take a long time, like long distance.
We wouldn't send a cross generational ship
Yeah,
out
no.
there. We'd send a probe,
Yeah, it'd be a lot easier to send a probe. Yeah.
right? So it makes sense to me that these species that we know as the Greys could theoretically be a byproduct or
Mhm.
genetically, you know,
Genetically kind of manufactured.
yeah, genetically engineered
Yeah, yeah.
versions of us, because it's like they have a lot of the same traits when you boil it down. They just got bigger heads.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a really interesting point. I've heard it before, but yeah, something like the whole thing about there being different races of alien as well. Like the two most
mhm.
popular, I think, are the Greys and the Nods. And the Nods, the Nordic aliens. Um,
Oh yeah, yeah, the Nordic. Yeah,
yeah,
the
those
those. Oh man,
they
it's so weird to think about because it's like they look just like us, right?
yeah. See, the thing that makes me kind of like think about the Nods, like the thing that kind of I like to think about as, you know, um, Nordic culture as a thing, and
Hmm.
people do in history did look like the Nords, as in Thor and Odin, and part of me thinks like, what if that's who the Vikings were seeing?
Nordic mythology. Yeah,
Yeah,
it could be.
what if that's where it stemmed from? Like,
There's.
it's always
I used
possible.
to be really religious. I'm no longer, but like as time goes on, I'm more and more aware of consciousness,
Yeah,
which sounds like a weird thing to say, but like,
I am. I think I have a understanding of what you're saying. Because like when I was younger, in my younger kind of 20s and things like that, like early 20s, late teens, I used to be a bit of a kind of cringy militant atheist, where I was
mm,
like, religion's stupid. It's so stupid. And as I've got older, I've kind of been like, it's not really that stupid. It's it's
yeah,
it's still
it's sort of like
I'm
I
not
feel like
religious myself.
the premise of religion is good. It's just like I think over time it changes into something else.
Yeah, there's the part of me as well though that thinks it's kind of like it's just the belief in but the belief in something higher than you, um,
Mm,
which I don't think is a stupid thought anymore. I'm still not a religious person, but I have a lot of understanding and respect for religious people now
mhm.
that I didn't have before, and I don't know if that's just came with maturity that I've started to realize like maybe there is something more to life. Whether it's I'm not saying it's God, but whether it's like I said about the Norse mythology, the pagan religions,
Hmm.
um, it could always be that things were happening that we just don't understand, and people have passed down those stories, and we've kind of grandized them, and I don't know where I'm going with this, but aliens
Um,
could be connected to religion, is what I'm trying to say. In some
yeah,
ways, it,
it's
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 not something that's impossible.
possible. Some people have said it before,
Yeah,
um, and it's interesting to think about, but it's like in the grand scale of ufology and things like that, that one's one of the harder ones to prove because obviously it goes back so far.
yeah, it goes deep. It's it's
Um,
the same with anything from that far back though. Everything's hard to prove. Like there's even things that are grounded in reality. Like we know that Jesus was a person, but That's probably,
Right.
we don't know much more than that. Everything else
Yeah.
is
It's
hearsay, he said, she said. It's
and yeah, it's so hard that maybe, and that's where you have to start to make assumptions or theories where it's like, okay, like I know aliens to be true, obviously.
yeah,
So does that mean the birth of these religions was their doing, or was it like, because kind of a hot topic today is what um the Bible states what angels actually looked like,
yeah.
and how it could be interpreted as like a flying saucer or a UFO of some kind.
My co-host was we were talking about like kind of podcast topics and stuff the other day, and he uh he mentioned to me like, have you ever seen what a Bible accurate angel looks like? And I was like, no.
It's crazy.
They look so strange.
Like wheels of fire. But if you go through like Ezekiel and read it, it's like, yeah, that's actually
I mean, apart from,
what it says.
it's because pop culture kind of took what Gabriel looked like, or
Hmm.
the kind of archangels, and they've been like, oh, well, that's an angel, but
And
actually,
it's based on a lot of Renaissance art too.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
but yeah, it's really interesting, really
but
interesting.
that's why a lot of folks say I look like Jesus because I have long hair and a beard
But
and
Jesus
I'm
was
white.
actually
And I
probably,
tell I always tell them like Jesus wasn't white, man.
yeah, he's
Like,
definitely a
I don't know
Middle
what to tell
Eastern
you.
man. Yeah,
Um, but like, and that's another interesting thing is religion, and it's so hard. Like, there is something because there's just been. It's another one of those that there's too many stories. There's too many testimonials about people
yeah.
talking about these abductions that it's
It's,
it's so hard, right? Because it's one thing if it's like, okay, that's one guy's crazy, but when so many people come out and say this, because this really isn't that uncommon. I have other friends that I've told the story to that they say, oh yeah, my girlfriend has a story like this, or my friend has a story like that.
yeah,
It's usually like, maybe like you might not know anyone that this has happened to, but somebody you know probably does.
yeah. That's the thing.
It's
You don't get people who just walk around going, "I was abducted. I was abducted," to
right.
everyone they meet.
Who
You
says
know.
that?
One thing I wanted
Ouch.
to speak to you about was, I'm gonna keep in contact with you after this episode of the
Yeah.
podcast out, and if you do end up getting some kind of hypnotic regression therapy, is that what it's called? Hypnotic regression?
Yeah.
Yeah. And if it goes well and you feel comfortable, I'd love to have you on again to talk about that. If
Yeah,
you get
I'm
it.
I'm definitely, if I do pull the trigger, I'm going to like probably record the whole session. I'm probably not going to share that because it's probably going to be really private,
Yeah,
but
yeah, I wouldn't
I
expect you
can
to.
but we'll see. It depends on the content, that's in it,
Yeah.
cuz
I'll just.
I definitely want the story to get out there, and cuz like the other thing too, like you caught me on Reddit, but I'm on there all the time because people in like the abduction subreddits are all like, am I alone? This feels weird. This feels strange. And I'm constantly there trying to reassure people like, hey, you're
Yeah.
not alone. This isn't that rare of a thing. And it doesn't seem to be like, it doesn't seem to have malicious intent. So it's like people
Yeah.
get really scared by this stuff, man. And it makes sense.
Well, that's one thing I was going to say as well. If I ever, I say if I ever, I'm probably going to cover some other kind of abduction topics. Fire in the Sky is one of them. Obviously,
Yeah.
Betty and
I mean, that's
Barney,
such a good story.
it is. Betty and Barney Hill, I'm going to cover at some point as well. You're always welcome to come back on for those episodes and talk about it with us if that's something you'd like to do.
Absolutely, yeah. Keep
It,
my contact info, and I'll definitely keep it in mind because
I feel like it'd
like I
be
said, I want these stories to get out there. I want more people
yeah,
to come out.
I feel like it'd be valuable as well to have an insight from someone with that experience while we talk about it and stuff as well.
It'll be
Obviously,
nice to get like a before and after too,
yeah,
like
definitely. So I'm gonna wrap it up now anyway because it's getting kind of late here, and
Yeah. No, we hit a lot of stuff.
We did.
Thank you, Derek, for doing this. This is a lot of fun.
I really
I'm definitely
enjoyed
gonna
it.
start listening to your
There's
podcast.
There's only one podcast up right now, but we're going to have another one up soon. Dyatlov Pass is going to be up next. By the time this one gets released, that'll be out, and then this will be the one following it. Thank you for coming on, because this has been a really, really great talk. I've really enjoyed it. If anyone is listening to this and wants to leave a nice comment or something and thank Kory for sharing his story, I'm sure he'd appreciate that. And
Yeah, wherever they can comment, if they have questions for me, just leave them in there, and I'll get to them.
yeah, that's fine. Or our email's always up as well, and I can forward them on to Kory for you if you want to send them to email and be more kind of inconspicuous, if that's a word. But right, so I'm just gonna stop the recording now. Thanks everyone for listening, and thank you again, Kory. I'm gonna stop the recording now.